Metallica has recently announced their new Metallica Podcast, where James, Lars, Kirk, and a bunch of guests talk about Metallica's history. And a couple of days ago, they released their first episode where they talked about why Metallica created the Black Album. And today, we are reviewing it, so let's start. So, the first chapter in the podcast was them talking about the early days. You know, the typical stuff you hear in various Metallica documentaries. How Lars, Kirk, and James were all influenced by the same British heavy metal bands. Saxon, Iron Maiden, Diamond Head. And they were all influenced and inspired by this kind of foreign music from Europe that mostly no one from Los Angeles was listening to.
Okay, and we're part of the heavy metal gang, going up to Strawberry Hill in San Francisco and headbanging to heavy metal bands from Europe that no one's ever heard of, and we bonded.
So as we all know, Lars went on to have an ad, drummer looking for a band, and he wrote under it his influences, Iron Maiden, Diamond Head, and so on. And Lars talked about the people that answered him before James, and how they weren't a great fit for the band, and for Lars. And they talked about the famous first meeting between Lars and James, and they said that they felt that the chemistry was right, because they both had the same high levels of dedication to the band. As James said, he didn't want to be with people that are just having fun. He wanted to pursue his passion as a career. As he said, he wanted to stop working in the sticker factory.
I knew that Lars was as dedicated as I was. Most of my other buddies were just hanging out and having fun. I didn't want to have to work at the sticker factory anymore, be a janitor anymore. I wanted to have music be my career, and that was all I knew.
Lars talked about traveling to Europe after he finished school to go follow Diamond Head, Saxon, Iron Maiden on tour, and he had a blast. And you can tell that he was, as a person, so dedicated to the music, and he was inspired by these people.
And so I said, fuck it, and I just finished school, and I went to Europe and followed Diamond Head around on tour in the UK, saw Saxon and Riot, saw the heavy metal Holocaust with Ozzy and Motorhead, and sort of spent some time around. These guys, I've seen them work and see them do their band thing, and I can do that.
Now we get to one of the most interesting parts of the podcast, the real story of how we got the name Metallica. Lars was hanging out with Ron Quintana, and they were talking about opening a record store or starting a band, dreaming together. And they both showed each other some lists of ideas they had in mind. First, Lars showed him his list, and he had some weird names.
We were talking about starting a band, starting a record store, and we were throwing names around, and he showed me this list he had of Red Blitz, Red Vet, Blitzspear, various blitzes, because Blitzkrieg was really big right then.
And then Ron showed him his list, and he had the cooler names like Skull Orchard, Metal Mania, and Metallica. Lars liked the Metallica name a lot. Later, Ron started a tape trading thing he had going on, and he named it Metal Maniac, because he loved it even more than the name Metallica. And Lars called him and asked him if he could use the name Metallica in his band, and Ron agreed.
And a couple months later, I get a call from Mr. Lars, and he wanted to use Metallica. And I said, that's cool. You should. Do it.
So Lars didn't steal the name like all the various websites say. All the various websites say that Lars pushed Ron to choose the name Metal Mania so he can steal the name Metallica. But Lars did ask permission for the name. And I guess we are all glad he chose Metallica. That's the greatest name ever. Jason Newsted was one of the guests on the podcast, which is really amazing. Really, really love that he was a part of it. He had kinda little segments, but that's fine. It's great that he was there in the first place. He talked in the podcast about how the band is successful because everyone knows his role and his part in the band. And he said that he tried to be the live guy And we all know he is the live guy. His presence and enthusiasm about playing live is something Metallica fans were grateful for and still quite miss, actually.
Everybody has their spot in the band to make it do what it does and why it's gone as long as it has, because everybody is maybe astute enough to realize their role and play it well. And mine was to be the live guy, lay down that concrete.
He said that the business, more practical side of things was handled by James and Lars, as it always was that way and still is to that day.
And the business was still conducted by James and Lars as always and still to this day.
He talked about the band's success, how they were still the same people writing songs, having fun, but the rate and speed of the success was something none of them could process. And yes, the Black Album was really an exploding success that changed Metallica's life forever. So thanks, Jason, for your contribution on this great episode. They talked about And Justice for All for a good portion of the podcast, which was quite interesting. Lars said that And Justice for All was really interesting because it was more like Metallica getting to be more progressive and crazy, and he used Dyer's Eve as an example. He said that there was no place left to go after that. Metallica reached their full capacity in terms of how complex, progressive the songs were.
Justice album was the culmination of the crazy progressive side of Metallica kind of being pushed almost up to a wall or as far as it could go. By the time Dyer's Eve was done, which is probably the craziest 5 minutes we've ever committed to vinyl, like the end of that era. And there was no place left to go after that.
And that was the maximum level of what they could do on a record. And I kinda agree with that statement. Then Kirk went on to say that he thought people were bored in the Justice Tour when they played the song And Justice for All because it was too long and complex, and that it was a good thing they had an explosion after the song so people could wake up.
I remember playing the song And Justice for All, and literally like a good 4 or 5 minutes into it, seeing people start looking up at the rafters, checking out other things other than the band. People...
That was the band.
Yeah, exactly. People kind of like looking at their watches, people yawning. And it was a good thing that we had an explosion at the end of the song because it kind of woke people up. I swear to God.
I don't know, if I were on a Metallica show and they played that song, I would be entertained and happy, so I don't know, but Kirk was feeling that people were getting bored from the long, complex songs. James also talked about it, and he said that the album reviews kept on saying the songs were too long, too kind of musical, too fancy for the average listener, for radio, for making a music video. And that is something they didn't want to happen. They wanted to expand.
They came to us saying, the song's too long. That's what we heard a lot. This song is too long for a video, for radio, for the average music listener. This is too musical. It's too much.
Too much.
Too much for everybody. And if you wanted to reach some more ears and grow the family, maybe simplifying some stuff, not trying to be so fancy.
Which is also something I disagree with. Master of Puppets, one of their longest tracks, is popular and everything, but Metallica wanted to keep it kind of focused rather than being too musically efficient. Not everyone has their ears trained for this kind of complexity. Lars also used an interesting statement that it was the shortest honeymoon period. The honeymoon period is where you get excited and look, we've made an album, it's the greatest thing we ever done. And And Justice for All had the shortest honeymoon period before Metallica starting to say what the hell and started to question everything.
It was the shortest to this day of whatever 10, 15 records Metallica has done. It definitely was the shortest honeymoon period before the questions started coming of what are we thinking? What was going on?
Why did you do that?
Right.
Where's the bass?
They also criticized the album's production. When they were first listening to it on the stereo, they immediately went, what the fuck, where's the bass? And Jason was so pissed off he walked out of the bus.
Yeah, my honeymoon period ended, I think, when Big Mick
I remember on the
told me,
bus.
yeah, he's like, something's wrong with the stereo. Yeah,
I remember.
something's wrong.
I was there.
The low
with you,
end
yeah.
is not on the stereo or something.
We were playing the songs for Big Mick and Jason in the bus.
We
one
were
morning.
so excited. We're like, check it out. Look what we've done. We've slept in a car for the last 30 hours and here it is. Da da da. And we put it on and Big Mick's like, what is that?
I remember Jason got up and walked out of the bus. He was so pissed off. He literally got up and walked out of the bus, grumbling.
Poor Jason.
So basically, Metallica made the Black Album because they were so full of the criticism and of the bad production, and the songs are too long, and they wanted to do something different, and Metallica were willing to step in some shit and try something creative and new. The next episode is definitely going to be about Bob Rock and his experiences in creating the Black Album. Lars said a really interesting quote about shorter songs, that they were actually harder to write than longer songs.
Weird predicament of, is it easier to write a short song than a long song? I would say it's the opposite. It's easier to write a long song as a musician, as a songwriter. The hardest thing to do is to edit yourself. And so I would say it's easier to throw the kitchen sink in there and always err on the longer side than it is to take parts out that you think are really good.
Because you have to keep the progression to a minimum, but still keep it interesting and keep it dense. And that's what Bob Rock helped Metallica to achieve. And Bob Rock gave his opinion about the Black Album near the end of the podcast, which I think was really interesting.
Everybody bought the record because they were drawn into the songs. Not just riffs, songs and lyrics. And I think that's their finest moment in terms of that.
That the Black Album was not just about the riffs, it's about the vocals, it's about the lyrics, it's about the drum sounds. The song itself is what made it good, and I guess that's true. It was a great podcast. It was edited really well. It was really interesting in terms of the information in it about why we got the Black Album. Really hyped for the next episode. Now we get